Death never knocks. It enters like dusk, sometimes gradual, sometimes sudden, yet always inevitable, uninvited. It does not ask if the bread is still baking or the child still dreaming. It does not wait to see the smile fade from a lover's lips or hear the final note of a father's lullaby. We are the ones who give it shape. Cloaks, sickles, and horses ablaze. But what if death was once something else? Something almost human? Before it became monstrous, was it ever merciful? This is a story whispered from one aching soul to another. A boy searching for reason. A mother remembering the myth. And a question etched into the silence between them. A son's impossible question. Craig lay curled like a question mark beneath his father's side of the bed. A week had passed since the funeral, but time, like the shadows in the room, had grown thick and unmoving. He was only 10, but already acquainted with silence, the kind that hums in places where laughter used to live. Sarah lay beside him, her arm draped loosely around his back, more to feel his heartbeat than to calm him. He turned toward her, his voice small, but the question enormous. Why is death cruel? She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to search. There were no rehearsed answers, only the heavy ache of a widow learning to mother through grief. How could she explain the impossible to him? The words tangled in her throat, like roots seeking soil. James would have known. He always had a story, a gentle way of folding the world's sharp edges into something Craig, aware and thoughtful, beyond his age, could hold without cutting himself. She remembered how her son's eyes would widen with wonder as his father spun tales of stars and time and ancient myths. Perhaps that was the inheritance she could still give him. Not answers, but a story to carry them both across this chasm. "My darling son," she whispered, brushing hair strands from his damp forehead. To answer that, we must go far back in time, before pain, before cruelty, to when death still had a heart. He blinked away tears and looked up at her. "Tell me. There is something you must know first," Sarah began, her voice softer than the evening light. Before death became cruel, before it was even the death we know, it was born. Death was born? Craig's eyes widened. Everything has a beginning, even the one who steals life. She shifted, gathering her thoughts like scattered petals. Emissary of Completion. In the early universe, all things flowed eternal. Stars burned without dimming. Earthly creatures lived almost without ceasing. The cosmos was a garden overflowing, choking on its own abundance. Apiron, the boundless one, Lord of the eternal realm, saw this imbalance. The sky cluttered with stars, the earth sagging beneath the weight of the nearly undying. He feared that a universe without endings would collapse under its own weight as it journeyed through time. There was need for equilibrium, and from this imbalance, he created an emissary, a shepherd for what must be completed.
Death, Craig whispered.
Sarah nodded, but the boundless one named him Morvain. He was beautiful, luminous skin, clear as mountain springs, a voice like wind through autumn leaves. You shall guide the finished to their rest, Apiron told him. You shall know when a story has reached its natural conclusion. Was he scared? Craig asked. No. Curious, like a child given a solemn task. Morvain asked, "How will I know when it is time?" Apiron gave him 3 gifts: eyes to see the thread of life, ears to hear its final note, and a heart to understand completion. But even sacred gifts can carry seeds of ruin. Deep, tangled love. For 1,000 years, Morvain performed his duties without hesitation, Sarah continued. He moved among mortals like a whisper, unseen, yet felt. A cool hand on fevered brows, a gentle voice guiding souls across the threshold. Craig frowned. But if death was kind then, what happened to make it so mean? Patience, she said. At first, Morvain took only the clearly finished, the ancient trees that had dropped their final leaves, the elders who had lived for countless generations, the wounded beyond healing. There was no cruelty in this, only completion. Mortals who feared the unknown beyond life began to understand this rhythm. They built rituals around passages. They honored their dead. They spoke of Morvain not as enemy, but as necessary friend. Sarah traced a circle on the bedsheet, releasing a weary sigh. But then something happened that would change everything.
What?
Craig leaned closer. Mortals began to love. Not just the simple affection of creatures, but deep, tangled love that refused to accept endings. And so they began to bargain. Morvain had never experienced resistance before, but when their bonds deepened into desperate love, mortals began pleading, and perhaps with that love came the strange ability to perceive him. The first time it happened, he was escorting an elder whose time had clearly come. The man's daughter clutched her father's hand and looked directly at Morvain, something no mortal had ever done. "One more year," she pleaded. "Let him see his grandson born." Morvain hesitated. This was not in his instructions. He looked into the woman's eyes and saw something he had never considered. that endings might have ripples, might tear through more lives than one. Against all protocol, he nodded. 1 year, no more. Word spread among mortals. Death could listen. Death could be moved. And so began the desperate pleas, the offerings, the bargains. Mothers promised years of their own lives in exchange for their children's. Lovers offered wealth, service, even their souls for more time together. Kings built temples to Morvain, hoping to curry favour. For a time, Morvain listened to these appeals with his perfect heart, judging each on its merit. Sometimes he granted delays. Most times he did not. Delays were granted from a place of understanding, not compassion, but the listening itself. This was the misstep, and Apeiron was watching. Costly bargains. One day, Apeiron summoned Morvain to the realm of the Eterna. 3 souls, said the Boundless One. Bring them. All of them, without delay. Morvain bowed and descended to the mortal realm. The first was Eva, a single mother whose young son was her entire world, the one bright spot in her modest life. When Morvain entered the woman's home, Sarah continued, he saw something that touched him deeply. The single mother had created a world for her son from almost nothing. Their table was simple wood, but she had carved little animals along its edge for him to trace with his fingers. Their clothes were patched but clean, hung with careful pride. The boy slept peacefully on a pallet of straw, but she had woven a blanket depicting the stars, teaching him the constellations each night. Craig's eyes glistened. Like you do with me. Sarah nodded, her throat tight. When Eva sensed Morvain, she didn't cower or run. She stood between him and her child and whispered, I know you must take someone, but he has barely begun. And without me, he has no one. Morvain looked at the sleeping child, and something stirred in him. Perhaps the first true emotion he had ever felt. Not pity or understanding, but compassion. He reached out, not to take her soul, but to touch her shoulder. How long would you need? Until he can stand alone, she answered. Morvain nodded. Then I will return when he is grown. And in that single act, for the first time ever, death deferred against his master's clear command. The second soul was a rich merchant, immersed in ledgers and laughter in his sprawling mansion filled with precious gems and golden lamplight. When Morvain appeared, the man smiled as if greeting a guest. Business is booming, he said. My debts are cleared, my future bright, and surely my good deeds speak loudly on my behalf. Let me taste a few more seasons." "Did death spare the rich merchant?" Craig asked. "He isn't like the single mother." That's the complexity of it. When Morvain arrived, the man was hosting a feast for orphaned children from across the city. "Was that just a trick?" Craig asked. "Perhaps partly. But the merchant also spoke truth when he said, 'See these children? I've established funds for each one's education. If I die today, the contracts become void. My nephew will inherit, and he cares nothing for charity. Give me 5 years to secure their futures properly.'" Morvain watched the children eating their fill, perhaps for the first time in their young lives. He thought of Eva, of her devotion. He saw a similar thread here, not as pure but worthy nonetheless. 5 years, Morvain agreed. No more. And that was his second deferral. The third was a provincial ruler, draped in robes and the love of his people. The ruler was different, Sarah continued. When Morvain came, there was drought across the land. The ruler had ordered his own storehouses opened, instituted water rationing, starting with his own palace. Morvain found him not on his throne, but in the fields, working alongside farmers to dig deeper wells. My death now would bring chaos, the ruler said simply. My heir is just 7. The neighboring kingdom would invade within days. Thousands would suffer. And was that true? Craig asked. Yes. Morvain saw it with his perfect eyes. The neighboring army already gathered at the border, watching, waiting. Morvain, who had been forged to see only completed threads, had now learned to recognize the threads that, if cut, would unravel multitudes. So he granted yet another stay. Until your heir comes of age, he decided. 3 times, Morvain chose mercy over mandate. 3 times, he listened to life instead of serving death. He returned to the realm of the eternal, not with 3 souls, but with 3 tales. Morvain expected reason. Instead, he met wrath. Price of compassion.